Welcome to the Career Coffee Club, where we brew the perfect blend of insight and expert advice relating to anyone looking to climb the career ladder or those who are currently seeking a new position. In each episode, we will be meeting with hiring managers and industry experts who will give their own unique perspective to support those who are looking for a new position or looking to climb the career ladder.
So whether you're just starting out, seeking that next career move, or that one big promotion, we have the insights for you to succeed.
So grab your favourite cup of coffee, settle in, and join us as we help you to build your career one conversation at a time. So welcome back to the Career Coffee Club. As we said on the first episode, we're joined by Sam and Jenny, who will come over to and do introductions in a second. But I'm looking forward to this because they are sisters.
Yeah.
They're going to have two very, very different approaches on hiring, what they look for. And it'll be more interesting when we talk about who's involved in the process and when.
And if they agree with each other.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess to summarize kind of the purpose and the overview of this podcast episode will be really to look at the journey from identifying the need within a business. How does that happen? To give some insight. And then also looking at that sourcing process, looking at kind of when you should apply, when you shouldn't apply. What do these guys look for on a CV or a resume, and giving some hints and tips along those lines.
To open the door on the other side, isn't it, for the job seekers, essentially, so they can understand what the process is, what goes on behind the closed doors, as it were, and hopefully give them some insight so they can understand why things are done the way they are and what they can potentially do to give themselves the best opportunity. For sure. So over to you guys. So Sam.
Yeah,
welcome.
Hiya. Hi everyone, I'm Sam. I'm currently working for Royal Enfield. My role is the head of finance for the EMEA region. I've been with them now for just over 2 years. And previously to that, I was with Suzuki and worked there as the head of FP&A and worked with them for around 17 years.
And it was hard giving up the car scheme.
It was, definitely.
For sure.
Can I just ask a very quick question there? And it's mainly because I kind of know what they are, but I don't know what the acronym is. What's EMEA?
So that's Europe, Middle East, Africa region.
Okay.
So it covers that whole area, basically. So
that makes sense. And then what was FP&A?
So FP&A is financial planning and analysis.
Right, okay.
So
I wouldn't have got that one.
But I think it's important to raise that we will ask some questions that look pretty stupid because, again, for people who are on the podcast or listening, they're not going to know everything.
Yeah.
So it's important that if there are things that we kind of ask you, like, hey, why are you asking me that? You're supposed to be a recruiter. Some of it's going to be breakdown so that we can, the acronyms need to be known. So Jenny, welcome.
Thank you. So I'm Jenny Elliott. I'm the head of HR at FCLG. So we deal with bespoke fleet management solutions. We have 145 employees. We've got 2 sites, one in Bicester and one in Essex. And I've been there nearly 3 years now.
Cool.
So.
And how annoyed were you when Sam left Suzuki and you lost your friends and family? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Selfish.
Yeah.
So just very quickly, fleet management, is that motor vehicles?
So we deal with a range of services from driving licence validation to fleet management, so vehicle insurance claims.
Right,
We also work on managed service as well.
So that's for companies that have vehicles or company cars and things like that?
Yes, yeah.
Okay,
cool.
Thank you.
Cool. So I guess if we jump straight in, there's a fair chunk to work through. But it would be great to start if we can start at the beginning and kind of give people an insight into someone's either left the team, you've got an increase in workload. How do you guys identify a need? And how do you identify kind of the skill set behind that? Who's involved in that decision? Kind of, if you could just give us some insight, just behind the scene work on, I know I need to hire, but this is what I need to do.
Yeah, that's fine. So I think it can depend really, the position can be coming available because of expansion of the business, or it could, obviously be someone leaving or just generally restructuring the team. So it could be various reasons as to why the position's coming available. But I think initially obviously it's agreeing exactly what is needed, what the role is. So the way we start is by putting together a job description. So writing out the tasks that job will cover. And obviously as part of that, identifying the skill set that's required. So we like to come up with essential skills and then sort of desirable skills. So,
Sure.
It's identifying from the start exactly what we're looking for. And then that then leads you into obviously then sort of grading the role depending on where that role's going to sit. And it has to go through the internal processes that we have. So obviously it will go through to the HR recruitment team, and it will go through all the internal approvals, etc., based on the hiring manager's recommendation.
And on the approval process, so is that done before it goes live, the role goes live?
Yes, definitely, yeah.
So when a role goes live and people apply for it, there's no more, other than approving the offer, the role is
role's
real.
signed off, yeah.
It's signed
Yeah,
off. Okay.
Yeah, because I think that's big at the moment. We see it a lot on LinkedIn where people are saying, I've applied for roles. And obviously you're not going to be able to answer for every business.
Yeah.
But we do see it a lot, unfortunately, where people are
not
saying,
a
I've
real
applied for a
role,
role.
yeah.
There's no, or the role gets pulled because of internal funding. And sure, there are global things that happen or economical factors that can result in a role being removed. But generally speaking, especially where you've worked,
Yes.
once a role's signed off, the role is signed off.
Yeah, definitely,
And there's a lot of work that goes into that part as well, isn't there? So you're not going to do that on a whim or on, just to see what's out there. There's a lot of work that goes into getting a role live and advertised.
Absolutely. Yeah. And obviously, internally you have to come up with the justification as to why you need that role. And, you have to justify that internally to the approvers as to why you're requesting that role, why it's that grade, etc. So from a hiring manager perspective, you have to do all that work in the background to get the approval before you obviously then publish it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay.
How's it work at FCLG and kind of previous other positions that you've had as well? And also from a HR viewpoint, because I suppose your journey on this is going to be slightly different to Sam, because potentially in some businesses, she'd come to you for sign off in the first place.
Yeah, really similar actually. So it depends if we're replacing like for like, or if we're actually looking for something different. Is there a change to the role? Do we need to look for something different? Is the business expanding? Is that the reason why we're recruiting? Do we need a different type of skill set for that department? So it's a bit more sort of forward planning as well. So not just saying, okay, that person's left, let's get a replacement. Actually, what do we need going forward? What do we need over the next sort of 2 to 5 years maybe in that area? What are we missing skill set wise? So that's sort of my approach, but the sign off is very similar. So we'll decide on the role, the job description will be finalised, and then we go live with the position.
And something that I've picked up on is the word we. So the word we's been mentioned quite a bit. I know the decision-making process in a lot of businesses, even in households, decision-making processes have changed because everything, costs has gone up. So it's quite risky sometimes to take that or put that on one person. How many people would you say are involved in the sign-off process? And appreciating they're two very different businesses. So, it'd be great to hear kind of from a more international brand, a more local brand, how that kind of fits in really. So, how would you say the decision is made between hiring managers and how many people are involved in that process?
I think it obviously depends on the department in the business, but obviously from a finance perspective, we would have an initial sign off within international finance, and then it would then go to CFO, etc. So it would go quite senior in terms of sign off.
And would that go, obviously within that, you'd have your internal team, your internal talent team, your HR team,
so you've got HR
obviously
involved,
yourself.
as well. Yeah.
So there could be, in some businesses, 6, 7, 8 people before a role is even given the nod.
Yeah, I think that would be quite normal to have, several layers of approval that you have to go through, obviously involving the HR recruitment teams, etc., as part of that process as well. So, and that's why I think it's very important that, obviously when you're initially coming up with the role and the requirements, you're very specific, you have the justification, and that you ensure that obviously all the approvals are complete before anyone starts going out to recruit the role, because like
that's
you say,
issue, right?
You don't really want that to come
And
back.
that's important because that's personal branding, isn't it? Or business branding, shall we say.
Yeah.
I mean, so many people, I worked with someone in the States recently who had a very personal attachment to a location and a business we were partnering. His experience wasn't amazing in terms of the interview, and he was put on hold and then the role was kind of pulled back. His perspective and his view of that company is now going to be related to that interview, not necessarily his personal attachment that he had in the first place.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same if you walk into a Starbucks and you have a really bad experience where, you know, your coffee's just thrown at you. I'm not suggesting this is what happens in Starbucks, by the way. But if you go in there and you have a bad experience, you're probably going to go to Costa next time, right? And I think a lot of businesses don't see that when it comes to an interview process. Businesses see it as their way of choosing the talent, not thinking about the talent's impact and the brand.
It's a really important thing, isn't it? And I think a lot of companies are good at that part now, but there are always the ones that aren't. But it's from my perspective, from internal recruitment, my very first part of the process is to project a good vibe about our business.
Yeah.
Because regardless of what the outcome is, if they've got a good feeling about the business, then that's the best thing. So if you get to the end of the process and you want to offer someone, but it's only at that point you start like telling them how wonderful you are, it's far too late because their impression has already been right from the word go. I did want to just quickly come back though on you mentioned about grading the role before it goes live. And I just think that's probably quite useful information for any people that are applying for a role, just to understand what that process is and how a grading, therefore a salary band, I imagine, is determined for a role. Can you share that?
So I think both the businesses that I've worked in are fairly similar, to be fair. I think within accountancy, there is quite a lot of salary surveying and benchmarking and things that you can do anyway. There's a lot of data that's available. And I think generally within finance, you'll normally be dictating a qualification level, which then in turn dictates the sort of level of the role and the salary. So if you're going out as a part qualified, for example, then traditionally that wouldn't necessarily be a manager grade. Manager grades would tend to be qualified. So you're sort of establishing the level of qualification required, which then determines the grade. And obviously then that grade will have a salary bracket, and then you'll obviously be doing benchmarking, etc. With that to back up why that salary is what you're looking at offering.
So there is a process, and it's not just a number that's plucked out.
No, it's definitely a process.
And so, did you advertise salaries on the roles?
Not normally, no.
I still think there's a lot of companies that don't. Do you mind maybe sharing why that might be?
I think it's a difficult one. If you're putting like too wide a band on, sometimes that's confusing for people.
That's like walking into you walk into a car garage and you go, I've got between 20 grand and 500 grand to spend. Yeah. What can you give me?
Yeah.
It's the same, isn't it? It's just not reasonable.
It's the same on both sides as well, I suppose, isn't it? That I was curious because it's a question that I get quite a lot. And I really want to advertise salaries, but I also really understand the reason why, or some of the reasons why we don't in our business. I will give indications when we get to a point where we're discussing with candidates, because at that point you have a rough idea of the candidate's salary, experience level, so you can give a number.
See, personally, from my point, and obviously again we're coming from a different viewpoint, 'cause it's external, is the amount of people that we approach, the amount of advert responses you get. And I'd say advert responses now actually are the least effective hiring method because of the amount of applications you do get that are irrelevant.
Yeah, you do get a huge
And also
volume,
hiring in the States, there's certain states where it's a legal requirement. You have to put on a salary band on your advert if your business is of a certain size. So I think from my viewpoint, I always post an advert with a salary, or if I'm speaking to someone, I will give a salary range. But if the client says to us, actually, we want to keep the salary confidential, we can then give a bit of a wider range because we've explained who the client is. But up until the business know who the client is, obviously from my point, I can keep everything confidential, if that makes sense. So if you don't want to give a salary because of, someone's possibly leaving the business and it's confidential information, no one knows who your organization is until we tell them, by which point they've either signed an NDA or there's something in place that can make sure it remains confidential. But I do think that, organizations, and what I hear a lot, and obviously if anyone's got thoughts on this who does listen in, let us know. But I definitely think there seems to be an issue where it ties in. People don't put a salary band on it, but they describe it as a CFO. But the CFO role then has the job salary of a plumber, and you're like on 30 grand, and you're like, well, actually I can't have a CFO. It's a totally different role, totally different spec, totally different salary range.
Yeah.
But they still expect to get a CFO for $30,000 or pounds a year.
So what would the advice be to say someone that was applying for a role that there's no salary in the role, but they're a fit for it and they're within the experience level, but there's no salary? I have my views, but I'll be.
That's why we're here. We want to hear from hiring managers, right? We want to know from you guys what you would say.
Keep giving my opinion, but So, what would you expect, or what would you hope for from that candidate where you've asked for their desired salary, maybe?
So generally we shortlist people and then we will go through a short screening process. So we will ask at that point, what are your salary expectations?
Okay.
Because there is no point in taking somebody further in the process if we are not aligned on that fact, because, that's going to waste their time. That's going to waste the hiring manager's time. We can't do that.
And that's fairly early on in your process.
It is quite early on. We ask for their expectations.
Sure.
And if we can't match that, then obviously we wouldn't continue the process.
Could they give a range? Would you accept a range? So if they said, well, I'm looking between 60 and 70, And I think that it's about being just sort of truthful to your level. You know the salary level that your band that you're in.
Yeah.
The reality is you're not going to, by keeping quiet, you're not going to miss out on a 50 grand pay rise, unlikely. But if the experience level is higher than yours, but they hired you into it because of the aptitude or your ability to get to that level, then sure, you can push for a higher salary at that point if it's still within the band. If it's not, then it's just clearly not the right role for you, is it?
And what about in your business, Sam? If someone's applying for a job, maybe they've pressed apply, what are your thoughts on people then reaching out and going, look, I've applied for this job, I couldn't see a salary? Is there then a point where you disclose that, or is it, again, you go through the interview process first? Because I think the frustration with some people is that obviously to go to an interview costs money.
Yeah,
and especially on site, right? So if you're immediately available, you haven't got a job, maybe you're running out of savings, but you've got to find the fuel, the gas to get there. You've got to find the parking. You've got to you sometimes get public transport to then turn out and
go, take time out of work.
I'm $20,000 below or over the range. I mean, what would be your advice to a job seeker if they've just pressed apply? Should they just drop a note across to people? Should they wait till the interview? What would be I know there's no right or wrong, but it's just your guys' view as hiring managers. What would you want to see people do so they don't waste your time or theirs?
Well, I think like Jen said, I mean, our process is similar. There would be an initial screening process, that there would be discussions about salary before it got to interview. I think if someone's applying for a role, then they haven't had that. They've just been offered an interview straight away without no discussions on salary. Then I think if they're unsure, they probably should contact someone to just check that out and not obviously
like a phone
waste
screening
their time.
before a first stage interview, for example.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
But I know some people aren't comfortable talking about salaries as well. That's the other thing.
Yeah,
Not even people in their current roles find that very difficult to have any
And I think
conversations about that.
But I think that's really important. And obviously we'll do a session on this at some point, but it's really important that you are honest when it comes to salaries, because there's no point in going through an interview process for 4 or 5 stages, getting to the end and then going, oh, well, actually I want more money. And we've seen it a lot where people do try and reduce the salary more than increase it, to be fair, because people who are slightly over on the salary band go, well, it's okay, I'm happy with a $20,000 a year drop. And actually the reality is they're not. Once they're then doing a 2-hour commute every day. And it's important to set that expectation from the start on both sides, because it is a long journey for some organisations. But I suppose something else that I'd like to ask is, we've mentioned about kind of that brief, and you both mentioned about kind of sitting down, working out the requirements. Something that I'm seeing a lot, and I did do a post on this today, is people saying I've applied for 30, 40, 50, 100 roles, right?
Yeah.
The reality is that there is no way there's 100 roles in one specific location for one specific person if you are applying for the right jobs. So how does someone know when to apply? And through your screening process, if you've got tick boxes, how many or what percentage would you be looking for someone to meet before you go, yeah, I will invite that person in because they've got a 60% match? Obviously, would you consider someone who's got a 100% match? What are your thoughts on how many tick boxes someone should tick on the duties, but also the experience?
Yeah. I think that depends on the role again. I think in your area, in finance, obviously that is quite specific. But in my current business, obviously, if people are looking to be a claims administrator, it's often unlikely that we're going to find somebody with that previous experience. So we look for more transferable skills in that area. So we look for good customer service, good experience, attention to detail, administration, those types of skills that could be easily transferred into a different role. So I think it's just because you haven't done that role, somebody might look at that and think there's no way I could do that. But the reality is they probably could, and they're probably more than capable.
And that's really key as well. Good information for people to understand when applying for that type of role. Don't be afraid to understand the role they're applying for. But also understand where the transferable skills are. And that's where you start personalizing your application, isn't it, to the vacancy.
I was gonna say that. But also I think, you know, I've worked with FCLG. I know how you guys recruit. I know your process. So I know one thing you're pretty good at is you do put on the advert about transferable skills. And I think that's something else that's pretty important for anyone who is a hiring manager that does listen to this, is if you are open to people with transferable skills, in a world where people are being rejected left, right and center and maybe don't want to press that apply button, make sure it's pretty obvious that we're not looking for someone from, you know, your claims administrator is a administrator for the insurance side of the business, right? So you can look at a general clerical background, strong attention to detail.
Absolutely.
But you do make that obvious. And I think, again, that's something else in the market that I don't see enough is businesses highlighting we're open to people who don't tick every box. But
And I'm going to open the can of worms now. We don't have to go down it. Don't we have to go into it completely?
Here we go.
But please do not rely entirely on AI to write your cover letter or your application. I see it all the time now, and I even see it when I do the telephone screens. That I can see people reading what they've prepared, and I'm in two camps because I like the fact that they've prepared. But also, I'm not seeing them at all. I don't get anything of them across.
Well, you mentioned that, didn't you? Because I said that one thing that's really important is your personal statement. And I think personally, most people read a resume or a CV for 6-7 seconds, right? So for me, you should be looking at the key duties, the key experience. Normally, as humans, when we write a list, the most important go at the top. So naturally, read the top 3 and the 3 experience. If you tick those boxes, personally, I'd be saying you're probably worth applying for. But that personal statement, you need to show that you tick those boxes. So, you know, I'm a FP&A professional. I've got experience with Power BI, building out dashboards. My key industry experience is across automotive, and I have EMEA experience coming back to what you would hire in your team, right? Straight away, you can read those 2 sentences and say, I want to read more.
Absolutely.
But you made
storytelling, isn't it? Like if they were all in bullet points for an opening statement, it would just mold into one. You'd never know anything about that person. You might, if they had everything, might want to explore further, but it's not the greatest.
But going back into your can of worms, I mean, you made a good point yesterday when we were doing our prep call, that you've seen quite a few of personal statements that definitely were written by AI.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, AI is great to get ideas and things like that if you're really struggling, but to just straight copy and paste, it's clearly quite obvious that's been done.
And we are going to come back to kind of how people can get some cultural fit and personality across on a resume, because I think that, again, is a big part of the hiring process now. And it'd definitely be worth touching on that at that point, because AI will remove who you are.
Absolutely.
You know, the wording will be fantastic and to a certain degree, but it could lose your personality.
I did see something, actually it was today, and I did write it in my notebook so I wouldn't forget, but I've been itching to say it, is a lot of companies, we don't use them, but a lot of companies use AI detectors.
Yes.
And if you're in a big application process with lots and lots of applications, you've used AI. I mean, I don't really know how it works, so it'll be something that we're going to have to talk about. Or
I was going to say, there you go. We'll find someone who's a business that can explain that.
But I mean, I just don't think it's the best thing. It's like you say, you use it as a tool to help you. Think
to
of
generate
words
some ideas.
Like a much better Google search, or other searches are available.
When we look at some of this stuff, you know, AI or not, I guess that kind of comes on quite nicely into the next bit, which is kind of that sourcing process. Because a lot of people do say AI is used to filter CVs or resumes, and AI is used. Now, one thing I can tell you is I haven't spoken to anyone who's made a 100% decision based on AI. Okay. You might do in terms of what pub you're going to or what bar you're going to meet. You know, you might say, what pub should we go to in Leeds? But you're certainly not going to hire someone on AI at this point in time.
No.
So I guess it'd be interesting to hear from you guys. Once people press that apply button, what happens? Who's involved? What platforms do you use? What are the sort of time to hire? And I know that a lot of this is going to come back to, well, it depends on the role. Of course it does.
Yeah.
But typically speaking, I think especially time to hire, I mean, across New York at the moment, it's roughly 50, 55 days is a time to hire for a position from that initial sign off to coming through the door. Yeah. Now, my job as an external recruiter, of course, is to do that a lot quicker.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't say our average time to hire is 21 days. But that's why we're hired. We're brought in to make hiring processes quicker and take away the pain points.
Yeah.
What would you say is kind of the typical time to hire within the businesses you guys are a part of, so that the listeners can get an idea of, look, it doesn't happen overnight. You don't just press apply and then you get an interview the next day.
Yeah. I mean, generally, I would say it can be a couple of months from start to finish, and it does depend on various factors. It depends, like you say, on the role, the time of year, how many candidates are looking at that point in time, because at the end of the year, December time is a really tough time to recruit. Same with January, the same when you're hitting bonus times because people are hanging on. So it really does.
There's so many variables, isn't there?
There are a lot.
Just managers. If a manager's on holiday for 2 weeks, it can
push the process
push it
back. Yeah.
Or they're doing appraisals. They're in that part of the year. Yeah. I would say that's probably the biggest stumbling block for us at our business.
Yeah.
And also, we're learning as well. We don't always get it exactly right what we're looking for. We're a tech business, so we're looking for very specific tech skills. But because we're a startup, we want also lots of bolt-ons. We want that person to do lots of other jobs as well.
Absolutely.
And we don't know sometimes whether those people exist. So until we've gone into the market and started to look, we don't know, and that can take 2 or 3 weeks. Yeah, I've just gone through one process where we didn't actually get the job title quite right, so we've had to adjust that, and that's made things a lot better for us. But we're now 3 or 4 weeks into the hiring process.
Yeah.
And what about Royal Enfield? What would you say is a sort of average time to hire, or even Suzuki? For a finance position. Yeah. From your experience, how long is it going to take for a hiring process for just one position?
I think from a finance perspective, based on all the ones that I've done in the past, you are talking at least a month, I think. And I think it does depend as well, like Jen said, in terms of the candidates that you've got coming through, because, you can always have in your head a vision of what you're looking for. And if the candidates you're getting through are just not fitting that mark, then sometimes it does take longer to get the right person. And, there have been times when I've been recruiting, like after COVID and things, where the market was very quiet. Like you said, it's harder to find people. It does depend on what's going on in the market at that point in time. So I think it does vary in that state. And I did just want to touch back on another point as well we were just talking about with the ticking the boxes and things.
Yes.
Because from my perspective, I think that especially when you're recruiting in finance, and especially if you're recruiting someone of a part qualified or even qualified level, I think, I'm always looking, if someone ticked every box for me, then why are they applying for the job?
Probably overqualified.
Yeah, and I just think you need to have some areas where you can say, I have some experience, but I'm looking to gain more experience in that area. And that's what I would look for, is someone that wants to develop, wants to grow in the business, because then you're getting yourself someone that you can develop within the company and provide that, growth plan for them.
Absolutely. And I think you speak for probably 95% of the market as well. A lot of people say if you tick 100% of the boxes, you're overqualified for the role. But there is a market out there, and situations change. I believe all of us around here have got families and personal lives outside. Yeah. One day we might just say, I'm done with the stress.
Yeah, of course.
I want work-life balance. I don't want to be a CFO anymore. I want to step back into FP&A, or even I want to step back into an accounts assistant or a senior accountant type position. So how do those guys promote that from an application so that they're not just automatically discarded? What would you want to see on a CV? Do you want to see a cover letter? Do you want to see it in the personal statement? What can they do to kind of highlight, actually, sure, you're going to look at my profile and you're going to tell me I'm overqualified. Yeah. But this is why I'm applying for this role.
Yeah, I definitely think a cover letter or the most information that you could put on the on your application is, the better. So if you've taken breaks from employment for certain reasons because you've been looking after an elderly parent, for example, put that on there so that it's really clear why you've taken breaks. Or if you're looking to step down in position, you know, be as open and honest as you can be, because a responsible employer is not going to discount you because of that. They're going to actually acknowledge your honesty and think, okay, this person's been really open about this. So it's really important just to include as much info as you can, I think.
I 100% agree with that. I think it's just the honesty. I look for the honesty, because that will bump you up in my eyes. If I feel like it's embellished, or they're using like big words to try and mirror, like to cover up part of it, then you can see straight through it. So the honesty thing is massive. But also, like you said, if the business isn't open to that, then they're probably not the right business for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
For sure.
You're going to struggle down the road.
And I think, you know, without opening another can of worms, and it's definitely one that we'll need to, you know, we'll definitely get someone in to do a session on this, but it's that whole unconscious bias, right? And I mean, you know, I even get people, and I can't think if I've got it on here specifically, but I know you guys actually do blind recruiting.
Yes.
Where everything is kind of removed, anything to do with age, race, gender, you name it is all removed from a resume, so that actually the decision made is on the skill set and on the person. I suppose on that, we need to kind of address a little bit on kind of how that works, because a lot of people will probably think the same thing as me, which is, well, of course, by the time someone walks through the door, unless you're dating in the dark and doing interviews in the dark, it's pretty obvious. Yeah, that's what I mean. It's pretty obvious who someone is, their appearance, their personality. And the first thing we judge as a person is someone's look or appearance. So how does that blind recruitment work? Is it still a relatively new thing? And I guess that probably touches base as well on skill-based hiring, because you alluded to kind of removing the title and looking at transferable skills. So can you just give us a bit of an overview as to what that is?
Yeah, of course. So it's something that I brought in a couple of years ago, not long after joining the company, and we had sort of a big focus on EDI, and we were looking at all areas of the business and how we could improve that. And one of the areas was obviously recruitment. So we, like I say, remove all personal details, name, address, there's no identity on the CVs whatsoever. And then we have a tracker. So we'll have candidate one, and then us as HR will have all of the details of that person, their contact details, when their CV was sent over to the hiring manager. So they will literally just receive the blank, like you say, with the skills, the experience, everything.
So the companies are off as well, I guess, are they?
The companies are on.
Okay.
But no schools, they're removed.
And no locations.
No locations. So qualifications obviously remain. And then the skills, experience, they're all still on there. I mean, at interview stage, unless, like you say, you're going to be in separate rooms and not have cameras on, that's the only way you can avoid that. But I think by that stage, that person's already invested in that person, because they've looked at their skills and experience and thought, you know, this person could really bring something to our team. So I think unless
I guess like that's not something that you can measure success with, or have you been able to?
I mean, it's quite difficult to measure, but we have definitely organically improved in that area. But whether that is from that one option of blind recruiting, it could have just happened regardless of that. So,
but I suppose you've eliminated the possibility that people are being sifted at that early stage, which
so everybody is on an equal par from day dot. So,
and what about the skill-based hiring side? Because again, I think that's important, because Sam mentioned, you know, ticking a certain percentage of boxes. Sometimes that certain amount of boxes isn't just a job title, if that makes sense. Because I know obviously if you're in an accounts payable role, typically your job title is just the pure accounts payable, right? So it kind of comes hand in hand. In other businesses, you might have a very internal job title. Which actually is completely unknown to anyone else in the market. So what is skill-based hiring, and kind of what is the benefit of it, and how can applicants make sure that they're right, you know, they're promoting themselves in the right way to show the skills they have?
I think just detailing everything that you've done, even if you think it's minor, I think just getting those things on there that shows that you're not just an accounts payable clerk. Maybe you have been involved in other areas of finance that aren't typical to your role, just detailing all of those things down, I think.
I think a prime example of that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sam, but a lot of time in finance, you want Excel skills, right? But so many people on LinkedIn don't understand that just by having Excel doesn't get you anywhere.
No.
We want to know what skills within Excel.
Absolutely.
So if we're talking about employee relations, just having employee relations, okay, what are you tribunals? Are you doing the bundle packs? Are you doing bundle prep? Are you dealing with lawyers? How far on this scope are you going? And I think that's also really important in leadership. And I think this is one thing that I find really difficult is not enough people go into detail on leadership. I don't just mean leadership in terms of have you managed a team. I mean, have you grown a team or have you established a team? Have you mapped out the talent for the team or have you just been responsible for, in call center environment, sometimes the manager doesn't even know the people are coming through the door. It's just bums on seats environment. And that's fine. That's those businesses. But it'd also be great that if you've got management experience to highlight, okay, this is where I sit in the business. Because again, you mentioned the complex structure, Sam, of Royal Enfield. You said you've got yourself as a director of finance, then you've got an international director of finance, then you've got a CFO. So it's important for people to understand where you sit in the chain of command. And then also how many people are under you. Are you managing managers or are you managing, the clerical teams? That I suppose that kind of adds to that skill-based side, right? Is going into detail and not just assuming, just a minute ago, you mentioned EDI. So obviously we're talking about equality, diversity and inclusion. That's common sense to us sat around here because we go through it every day. But when you put something on your CV and you assume that everyone knows.
True.
Actually, it's really important that you break that down into what you are doing. Even payables, where we're certainly not doing injustice to payables, by the way. But a lot of people put making payments. Well, is that a wire or is that a bank transfer? Are you dealing with check?
How much is the payment?
Are you dealing with the size? Are we dealing with international? Are we dealing with multi-currencies? If in multi-currencies, what multi-currencies? And I think this is what people don't remember. And again, when you plug it into AI, it spits you out the general duties of an accounts assistant. It doesn't give you those skills that separate you from the other 99 to 200 applications.
A lot that comes down to is if you're, I don't know, let's stay on the finance theme, but if you're a financial controller, for example, don't take it for granted that the person who's doing the first sift or even the second sift is in that level. So
absolutely,
I think that a lot of people fall into that gap, don't they? Where they think, well, I don't need to explain that because that's obvious. But it's not. If you're applying for a role, let's take that on the job spec, it says must have zero experience. Zero is a package. It doesn't mean you haven't got any experience. I learned that from someone. Have a look it up, search zero up, find out what it is. And then you could go, okay, well, I've used a system similar to that. And then put that system down and say that you've used that finance system that is similar to zero, because then whoever's reading it, if they're not qualified, they'll understand it. So make it easier for them.
Yeah, true.
And I think me and you are a prime example of that, right? You're an internal recruiter. You do a lot of internal recruiting.
I recruit scientists, PhDs. I don't know any of that. Really.
But what I mean is you find your engineers, but you come to me to help you find finance people because finance isn't your strong point. So when, you mentioned it earlier, what is FP&A? You don't have to know everything as an internal recruiter. You're going to have strengths and weaknesses. But that's why, to your point, it's important that you really elaborate on those skill set and speak in generic commercial terms so that people understand what they're reading, because the person on the other end of the line, if they're a biotechnology organization, the chances are the person who's been hired as the internal recruiter will have a biotechnology background or a life sciences background. So you're not going to go and hire a construction specialist, for example, who's a talent construction specialist to come in and do that job. So you have to elaborate what those roles are. So just kind of coming onto that then, onto the content side of things. And we mentioned the personal statement. We're kind of in agreement that we like a personal statement, but we don't want to hear, I'm honest, I'm trustworthy, I'm loyal. We all know that's rubbish. We all want to be on a beach. That's the truth. What about things like the length of the CV and the resume? Because I mean, we touched on that as well. Is, you know, should it be 1 page? Should it be 3 page? Should people have a short form and a long form?
I think it's like getting the balance, isn't it? Like Jen said, obviously, it's about getting, you know, enough detail down so you can actually understand what a person's actually been doing. And I think in finance as well, it's difficult with job titles because they can be misleading. You know, someone can be a finance director of a smaller company, or they could be a finance director of a really large company, and like also quoting the turnovers of the company, maybe the employees. So you've got the size of the company on there. So it gives you a feel for what they're actually responsible for. But I think it's getting the balance, because realistically, I think for me, reading something, anything over 2 pages, you don't really want to go any further than that. And I think, like you say, you want to get the most important things down first. So your personal statement, for me, it's qualifications as well, because from a finance point of view, especially if you're hiring part qualified, you want to know where they're at in their qualifications, when they started it, what exams they've got left to sit. And that's really useful information to read straight away, because then you know, okay, they tick that box type thing. And then also the other thing that's quite nice is maybe just some key achievements within the role. So, okay, your role might be these tasks, but what have you actually achieved while you've been there? You know, have you implemented a system? Have you brought in a new process? Have you saved money? You know, these examples just give people a bit more idea of what you've achieved while you've been there in that role, rather than just, well, I do reconciliations, or, you know, I prepare management accounts. So I think it's just trying to actually put a bit more into it, but not going too detailed.
And don't undersell, like, sometimes you might not have seen a project through, but you've been involved in it.
Yes.
And, you know, even if you've been at the front part, you've still been in the planning.
Yeah,
and it's important
exactly.
info, isn't
absolutely.
it? I know that a lot of people, myself included, I'll just think that's not. It wasn't that good, or it didn't work out. But it's important things to understand the journeys, that sometimes people's, you know, that things that don't work out are more valuable than the ones that do.
Yeah, you learn
so
from
much.
that sort of thing. And sticking with your most recent roles as well. You know, if you've had a job 12 years ago, we don't need to know the detail of that. Let's just focus on your key.
Well, that was going to be a question that I was going to ask, actually, is like, because we talk about the length, but we don't talk about how far back.
Yeah.
And sometimes I look at a CV and I go, okay, this person's been a head of FP&A, but they were head of FP&A in 2010. But I want to see how they got to that journey.
Yeah.
You know, I can see their kind of career, I can see the growth,
Yeah.
but I can't see pre-2010. Now, to me, that's not a massive issue. It's not going to be a deciding factor at all.
No.
But I know some people, I get clients ring me and say, well, actually, I want to know what they were doing. Genuinely, I want to know what they were doing when they left school. And you're like, well, they left school 20 years ago.
Yeah,
so why is that, to me, why is that relevant? I mean, what are your guys' views on how far back do you actually want to see? Because there'll be people there going, how can I get 30 years of career on 2 pages?
Yeah.
So how far back and how much detail do you want them to go into? Or is it more important you just highlight what you've done in your most recent roles?
Well, I think your most recent roles is the most important. You know, do I need to know that, you know, when they were working at school, they were a waitress or whatever? No, I don't. Like, it doesn't matter. And I think, like, if you're now applying for a role, you know, say if you're applying for a management accountant and you started in accounts payable or accounts receivable or whatever it was, it doesn't really have much relevance to what you're doing now anyway. But I think you can just still list, you know, maybe the name of the company and the job title or something and the dates you were there. That's fine. But you don't really need to go into the whole list of all the tasks you completed in that role 10 years ago.
So really, your advice will probably be last 2 roles, go into a fair bit of detail.
Yes,
everything else maybe summarise. I guess
irrelevant, so I think as well, isn't it? So if they've been an FP&A manager for 10 years, you don't need to put the other 5 that you were FP&A manager before. You can put
list
various between these dates, worked at various companies, you know, something like that. Just one thing I'll add, sorry, Matt, I remember is it's obviously different for graduates or earlier careers. You know, maybe the waitress role, or, you know, the whatever the role was is relevant.
If that's their only role, potentially.
It shows work ethic, I suppose.
I was going to say, that comes back to the skill-based hiring, right? That comes back to what skills did you learn in that position that can transfer into this organisation. That's But again, I mean, that's so important. And I've got, we'll lead on to this in a second, but LinkedIn, right? The amount of people that when I do a search don't have systems listed. Same as on resumes. You know, the box is ticked to say, yes, I have used SAP, but then actually on the resume, there's no mention at all. Yet I would argue, and Sam, I mean, especially from finance viewpoint, and I know HRIS is a big thing now, a lot of digitalization going on in that space. Surely systems are a huge bit of information that businesses want to see now.
Yeah, definitely. It's always useful to know what systems people have used. It's not necessarily always a deciding factor, but it's just useful to know what they've used, I think.
For sure. And would you agree?
Yeah, I think definitely detailing those things is really
But
helpful.
on LinkedIn, I mean, it's madness that people won't put their skills on LinkedIn, because that's how you search, or how as a recruiter you search.
Yeah.
You'll put a job in, and LinkedIn will do a sift on everyone who matches that job description. And if they've got those systems in there and you've not got them on your skills, then you're not a match.
All the algorithms work based on keywords.
Yeah.
And the problem is, I'm not technical enough to know about SEO and search engine optimization and all that, but LinkedIn works the same. Yeah, how you're found will determine on the words that the person's searching for. You know, if you optimize your profile right, you should be able to be found for the most niche, or for my US market niche skill set that you have. You know, I can run searches where I can go so specific that I can have 3 people on my search because it's so local, it's so close, it's so system, and you are then the perfect person.
Yeah.
If you don't have the experience there, or you're not listing it, you're missing out on so many opportunities.
That's a big problem for us. If they're not listing it, I'm missing out on, and I don't know how to find them then.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the hardest thing.
And I am going to be running a session on that, both through Arrow Search and through the Career Coffee Club, which will be a free web-based session on LinkedIn. So we'll promote that separately. But and what I'm going to do is show people how we search, and giving the back end of a search to show that what that can bring. Yeah. So I suppose just kind of get into the back end of things. We touched on it at the start, in like kind of EQ, softer skills, environment,
EQ.
cultural fit,
EQ,
emotional qualities.
Okay.
And kind of that, the softer part of someone's journey. How can they get across that they're a right fit culturally? Because again, we can't just look at someone, Suzuki, for example. And I mean, Suzuki's a prime example, right? She was Suzuki GB, not Suzuki Worldwide.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Which is a significantly different business, less employees at Suzuki GB.
Yeah.
And I remember you always coming to me and going, I don't want someone who's been at a big, large corporate, because maybe that person is a bit more channeled.
Yeah.
So how can we now know that businesses can't just be the reason we make a decision on someone's cultural fit to the environment? But what can people do on their resumes? And I like the fact you mentioned a bit of a summary. Is there anything that they can do to go, this is why I think I'd be a good fit for this organization? Is it a personal attachment? Is it, non-profit's a prime example. If for instance, you love animals and they're an animal charity, there's a really nice emotional connection there. What would you guys say you want to see for someone just to show their personality? Because again, hobbies sometimes can be, they're into that hobby. I can't think of anything worse. I mean, me personally, I can't think of...
It's the football team one that gets me. It doesn't bother me, but it could...
I can't think of anything worse than sewing, right? But that's my own personal opinion. But if I read something that says, I like sewing, you naturally make a judgment. You don't want to, but you do. So what can people do? How can they make themselves stand out from a personality viewpoint?
I mean, I think it is very difficult with a CV to do that. And I think that's why you're sort of quite keen to sort of, interview people on a first round basis quite quickly. I mean, again, you can use a personal statement to say, a bit about yourself and what you're looking for. You can obviously do a covering letter as well if you want to do that, I think. And just you can talk about the type of organisation that you'd like to work in and what you're looking for, or, what you have worked in. You can add that into that, I think. But it is difficult, I think, to portray exactly who you are.
Your
on a CV.
personality,
I think that's the hard thing.
And what would you say from a HR viewpoint? Because, of course, again, you're blind hiring as well.
Yeah.
So we're basically going on skill set at this point.
Yeah.
What sort of things, and again, I think it's important to note that what sort of things would you look for, or what have you seen on a CV that have made you go, wow, that could be a really good fit? Is it team size? Is it that people are listed business size? Is it that they come from a competitor? What sort of things would you look at and go, actually, that could be a really good fit for this?
Again, I think it depends on the role that you're looking for. Like Sam said, it's really hard to stand out on a couple of pieces of paper and portray who you are and why you think that you're a right fit for the business. But like you said, with recruiting, sometimes you're just met with sheer volumes. So realistically, it would be great if people only applied if they were actually interested in that role, in that position, and they had researched your company a little bit.
Yeah.
So anything that you can put to personalize that on, if it is a cover letter, is immediately going to make me think, oh, okay, they've actually took some time to look at our business and actually understand what we do, who we are, have a look at our culture fit and those types of things.
Values,
And they
those
can
kind of
point
things.
those things out, can't they? I looked on your
Exactly.
website and
It's
you
a bit
look
more
like you've got a great
bespoke.
culture. And it's,
And would that make them stand out? I know that's a really silly question, but you would read that, right? Because I think the common impression is that people don't read that. And I think there's a lot of people out there that go, well, I've tried it.
There will be people
and it didn't
that
come
don't.
back.
Yeah.
There will be people that don't. But I personally read them because a good one will tell you everything you want to know.
Yeah.
But like if they've got an address and you think it's quite a long way away, and they put in their personal statement, I know that the office is X number of commute away, but I will eventually relocate, and they explain that.
Yeah.
That's one of my screening questions anyway. So they've helped me, and I think, okay, great. That's they've thought about it.
From my viewpoint, I think something that's really simple and quite a nice way to do it is talk about business ownership model as well. I think that get overlooked quite a lot. If you're from a private equity, VC, capital funded, fast growth, aggressive, strict deadlines, that's a significantly different personality style to someone who is going to come into a 4-man business startup organization.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I'm not saying those people can't do it, but I'm saying that if you're going from a VC business, piggybacked whatever, to another VC PE, it's pretty important you highlight that.
Yeah.
And in the same way, if you talk about, they're a family run, owner managed, the business has been going for 200 years, it's been passed down generations. If you're from a similar environment, it's certainly worth listing.
Yeah.
I certainly would be highlighting that. And I know when I promote people, if I'm sending resumes to you guys, I always do my own cover letter to say, I think this person is right because of A, B, C, D, E. Now, you won't see it on their CV, but this is from the conversation I had with them.
Yeah.
And I think that's where, recruiters can add value, but obviously there are businesses and times when you won't use recruiters, and that's cool. We're not there for everything.
And this is something we'll discuss more on, is around choosing the right recruitment partner from a business perspective, but also from a candidate perspective, is that only works when you've got a trusting relationship. So I work with recruiters. I work with Matt at Arrow.
Oh, we've got a trusted relationship.
Yeah.
That's nice.
And
it's nice to know.
And the thing that I can be myself and open and honest with Matt, say this is what we're looking for. And I know that when Matt calls me and says I've got a great candidate because of this, I don't even need to know this, and this. If Matt says they're a great candidate, then I know that he's not selling me. And that's the thing I don't want. Once we've established that relationship and we've signed the terms and agreements that you're going to provide me with candidates, then you no longer need to sell to me. And I can be, myself, and you can be yourself, and that's why it works so well.
For sure. And I think when it comes to kind of working with recruiters, it's also important you are honest. Because again, I work with a lot of people where they kind of feel like they need to tell you what you want to hear, and I'm sure you guys see it in the hiring process, and you kind of think, like, actually, is that right? Are you sure? Because then I'm going to start putting things your way that's not right. But again, like you say, we'll come back.
And then
to
when
that.
you come on to salaries as well, you don't want to be second guessing what the recruiter's telling you, because they're ultimately representing the candidate, and vice versa. You want to be open and honest and say to them that this is our situation, this is the budget, this is what we think, and you can figure it out together. And ultimately, that's going to be the best interest of the candidate as well. It's not. I can only speak from our company and the ones that I worked for, is that we genuinely don't try and get people cheaply. We genuinely try to get them what they're worth within the business, and the difficulty is sometimes they're worth a bit more than what we've got. That inevitably happens. But.
Yeah, sure. And just to kind of make sure we're not going on for too long, we could go down a lot of rabbit holes here, and we've opened quite a few cans of worms. But I guess two things that I definitely want to touch on before we go into our quick fire round, which I think we mentioned, we might not have. But first one is, obviously we've spoken a lot about resumes and we've spoken a lot about CV. LinkedIn's big. Yeah. Do you then look at someone's LinkedIn profile? Is a LinkedIn profile the same as a resume? Like, from your perspective as a hiring manager, not as a a kind of individual who's got social media.
Yeah.
But do you look at that as a way of going, well, if I'm looking at someone's CV or resume, I want to see something different on LinkedIn? Or are you looking at going, well, LinkedIn is just basically the online version or digital version of their CV?
Yeah, I think it should be the same in theory, I'd have thought. I mean, like, I would expect if I look them up on LinkedIn to have the same things listed as what they've got in their CV. To some extent, you wouldn't have the same level of detail potentially on LinkedIn, but...
And what about someone who hasn't filled out the profile, much? Because I know for some people, it's like, well, hang on, LinkedIn's pretty massive now. I'll be honest, if someone applies to a job, then I go on to link their profile and there's absolutely no information, I'm a little bit like, this feels a little bit
I'm not
odd.
sure. It's massive for people who need it. Like if you're in a job, you've been in a job for 10 years and you've got no inclination to want to start looking, and then all of a sudden you're redundant or whatever, then you might not be your first place to go.
For sure, for the record, I'm not saying it's a decision maker. Yeah. But I'm saying, like, when someone's applying for jobs, but they've got absolutely no information on their LinkedIn, or they've got LinkedIn, they're very active and there's no profile picture.
Well, the advice would be
the profile picture gets me for sure. Like, if you're going to use LinkedIn, make sure there's a profile picture.
It's at least 20 years younger than you actually
Well, I remember, and also make sure that it's professional, because I remember mine was me cuddling my dog on the sofa, and I got absolutely ripped for years for that. So that was not ideal. So what about you? What are your thoughts, Jenny, on like LinkedIn? Is it something that you use to source? Do you use it to...
Yeah, I mean, we obviously post positions on LinkedIn and we will do searches on there to try and find candidates. I think if you're open to work and you're looking for a position, again, you want to put as much information out there as you possibly can, get people to repost, get people to share your post, so that you're putting yourself out there as well. I must admit myself, I always used LinkedIn for recruiting in my previous company, but I didn't actually develop my LinkedIn until I was actually looking for a job. So
that's to your point. So.
But when you're in that position where you're looking for work, you should be putting as much important. If you can to put as much as you can.
When you guys search on LinkedIn, and we'll touch base very quickly on how we search, because I think that's really important for the people who do listen to this, is what do you search for? Like, how do you search? Is it keywords? Is it certain systems? Is it kind of taking the 3 bullet points we spoke about?
Yeah.
How do you define your search?
Generally, it will be for, say we're looking for an analyst, it will just be analyst, location, and define that search. We also use Indeed search quite a lot for that as well. So putting in the keywords, maybe if we've got companies, competitors that we will put in search to see if we can find people that way and try and source through Indeed also.
And do you get involved too much on that, or is that really kind of with the talent team?
Yeah, that's with the recruitment team, so I don't get involved in that side.
Because I think that's definitely a frustration of mine, is not a frustration, but biggest bit of advice I can give to people is LinkedIn is social media in its category, but it's professional networking. And I think actually the less people you're connected to, the more completely out of network you have. So you could be perfect for a job, but because you've only got 1 or 2 connections, no one's got a 2nd or 3rd tier connection with you, which means no one can ever find you.
Connect with your colleagues, your peers, people you spoke to at
and recruiters actually are great to be connected to, because we have massive networks. So by connecting with one recruiter, you could have 20,000 2nd tier connections now, which opens up the network of people who can find you.
And don't post negativity.
Views. Well, I was going to come to that as well.
Don't post your bad experience with a recruiter or bad experience with a company, because although it might be right and valid, it's the worst thing I can see on someone's profile. Something they posted about, I don't know, it just gives the wrong message.
Everyone makes mistakes, I guess. It's not always about grilling people on the right platform.
Can we do an open to work banner quickly?
If you want to.
So do you? So there's an open. You've seen the open to work banner, yeah.
Why are you asking my permission?
I don't know.
I love this.
Yeah,
the control.
So does that mean anything to you other than that they're open to work?
No.
See, it's such a myth, isn't it? Do you know what we mean? The green banner.
Yeah, the green banner.
If you looked at someone's profile, what would be your perspective of that? Just they're looking for work, right?
Yeah.
I think it's a recruiter thing. I think that on LinkedIn, all I see is recruiters saying it doesn't work, it makes you look desperate, you shouldn't put it on there.
I personally think it's because anyone who's good that's met with a recruitment agency, they want to have autonomy.
Yeah, I think
and a
you're
bit of
right.
exclusive. Now, I might be completely wrong. That's my own view on it, right?
It's slightly cynical,
maybe.
but it
They'll
is
say,
probably
take it off because we don't want other people to know you're open to work.
Like, if you, like you were saying, if you look for other companies doing similar things, if you're searching for somebody, well, if you're searching through some people that are doing that particular role and they've got an open to work banner, like it's game on, isn't it?
You're going
Do I think, as a recruiter, just for reference and kind of how I use it, do I use it to then go in and search to expand a talent pool or to find people that have got skill sets that I can utilize, but not for open positions, if that makes sense? So as a recruiter, you kind of have an active database and kind of a passive database. So you kind of have the people who are perfect for roles that you've got open right now. Yeah. But of course, you've got your passive database of talent and a network, if you like, of people that you go, if I get this job or I can proactively promote this person. If I've got a job on and it's an urgent need, then sure, by filtering by open to work is fantastic, because it means I can access a pool that are really specific and obviously are open to work.
Yeah.
But for my passive, if I'm trying to grow a database and I'm trying to grow my passive network, then the green banner doesn't really mean too much because it's not urgent. Does that make sense?
Well,
it's a bit slower.
The problem for as a recruiter, from an external recruiter, is that open to work is almost too late for you guys then, isn't it? Because you add value by finding the people that are just thinking about putting the banner up.
Yes and no. I think there's some companies where they come to us because they don't have the facility or the capacity or the time to recruit, in which case 100% I utilize the open to work banner because I'm still doing my job. My job has been assigned to go and find that company the best talent. Now, that company, sure, could log in, they could go to open to work banner and they could find these people themselves. I'm not denying that.
But that's not what they've hired you for,
but
is it?
No, not what they've hired me for straight out. But at the same time, if they've come to us to find people and those people happen to be open to work, I'm going to utilize you, right? Fact.
Yeah.
On the flip side, I've also got my passive or my network that I can dig into who might not have that open to work banner, who may not be actively looking for a job because I know when the right role comes up, I can inform them.
Well, that's the other part of the relationship. So you have those relationships with the client, you have those relationships with the candidate.
For sure.
And if they trust you, they don't have to have the open
And for
to work banner
clarity,
because
sometimes they're the same thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes your client is your candidate and your candidates are your clients. But I think that's, just touching on your point and to kind of wrap up that bit fairly swiftly is, we said, what is the myth around it? I personally do think it's not worth it because actually you're a really good candidate. I can help you. By you having open to work, you're showing everyone else, and actually I lose the value.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the unethical ways of recruitment, but that's my view, right? I mean, there's no logic or science behind that. That's my personal view.
Yeah.
But if I was job seeking right now, as a recruiter who lives on LinkedIn, would I be putting open to work banner up on my photo? 100% I would.
Yeah.
So because I wouldn't try and sell a car.
If you're open to work, have an open to work banner.
I mean, I wouldn't try and sell a car without putting an advert in the local paper or telling everyone it's for sale. People need to know, right? So, final point on social media. Background checks. Obviously, a lot of people, in some industries, you have to have your background checks. Do you guys check any other social media platforms, or is it, hey, once you've applied, it's done? Because you hear these horrible myths of, they checked my Twitter from 2012 and I done this, and it's like,
No, I would never do that.
For anyone listening, don't look at my Facebook from 2012.
We'll all be searching that 1 million.
Yeah, my university years are not ones to be explored.
Screenshots.
Yeah.
I just remember getting messages from my mum like, can you please take that down?
Well, when you have older kids, I mean, my kids are my mediators now, so my censorship.
Yeah, I remember one saying, don't do a podcast, Dad, you're not allowed to do that. So just a very, very final question. We touched on it earlier very briefly around, when to apply, when not to apply. We've spoken quite a lot about relevance and making sure that you're specific to the applications. Yeah. I done a post today, less is more. How important is it to find the finished article? And by finished article, we're talking 70, 80%. We're not talking 100% of the boxes. Versus 60%, but their personality is I want to grow. Yeah. Is it a case of you look at both? Would you encourage someone who hits, what percentage would you say hit this percentage before you press apply?
Again, I do think it depends, but if you've got that openness and willingness where you want to learn and you can get that across to the hiring manager when you meet with them, that is so important, that attitude, that willingness to learn, that you're not where you might need to be for that role, but you're really confident that you can get there.
But it's probably important to note though, right, that if someone's an administrator right now,
Yeah.
and they're applying for a 60k FP&A role, but they're really passionate. I mean, I want to be an astronaut, and that ain't happening either.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important to notice that, like, there's got to be a percentage. So regardless of the role, if we take away you're extremely transferable. So we're moving to the level now where there is a requirement.
Yeah.
How much does someone need to tick, in your opinion, when you're reviewing a resume for you to go? Because at this point, you don't know their willingness to learn either.
Yeah.
So,
I would say they need to be over half.
Over half?
Yeah.
Well, I was just thinking whether it's percentages. I know it's not very quick fire, but like if you get your essentials right, then the essentials are the essentials.
Yeah,
and then
exactly,
then it's a percentage of your desirables really that.
So Sam, you'd focus more on what the essentials are than the duties.
Yeah, I think the essentials have to be there, and sometimes there's non-negotiables within that. And then, like you say, the desirable is the bit that you can move on, I think. More.
Especially with qualification, if somebody has to be qualified, like
if
you
the role
can't
is
get around
qualified.
that.
For my US network, it's important to note that in the UK, you need certain qualifications to get to certain levels of accountancy and finance, which in the US, you guys have CPA, of course. In the UK, you've got your CIMA, your ACCA, your ACA. And when we talk through this about part qualified, that's kind of what we're referring to. We're not on about like master's degrees and bachelors, which of course is, the US is great for that, because actually they go more down experience, and you learn and you grow, and it's what someone can bring to the team. I do think, and Sam, we may have different opinions on this, but I do think that's sometimes where the UK can let itself down in terms of finance, because you miss good people, because actually we're a stickler for a qualification. You must have this qualification. In certain roles, I 100% agree. Anything compliance based or legal based, I totally get it. But FP&A, commercial finance, where it comes down to that person's interpretation and ability to build models and Excel. Why do you need to be CIMA qualified?
The one thing though I would say, sort of a takeaway advice for someone who's applying for a role though, is try and question a job description, because they're not always done well, or there might be things missed, or there might not be challenged. I will challenge our hiring managers that if they put must have 5 years experience, I'll ask like, why 5? What if they had 4? And like, there might not be someone asking that question to hiring managers, so that goes in and goes out. Like, question it. So if you go, well, I hit everything, but I've got 3 years, then that apply. And say why 3 years is worth 5 years of someone else's experience. And sometimes even qualification, not like the FCCA or whatever, but the like a degree, a grade. It's like why again.
And again, we're going to have a lot of people coming on, aren't we? We've got a couple of guests lined up for kind of discussing journeys, and obviously we'll probably lean on you guys as well through this to talk about people who are entering their careers in HR or finance. Do they need the qualification, or is it a case of go out there and get the experience? Do I need a degree, or am I better to go to a public accounting firm and get my ACA or my CPA early on? But speaking of questions, to finish up, quick fire. Now, the interesting thing is I've only got 3 written down here, so we're just going to have to go off tangent, and we'll let my ADHD brain just run, right? This is going to be fun.
How many were there supposed to be?
5, we said, but we'll go for 3. So
3.
Let's go Sam, then Jenny.
Okay.
And then we'll throw you in this as well, because you're internal. So
I'm not very good at quick fire. I tend to like ramble.
See me as Anne Robinson, okay? This is now the weakest link. Education or experience?
It's a difficult one, but I think education.
Experience.
Cool. Resume or LinkedIn?
Resume.
CV.
Okay, we'll go with CV. Yeah. Okay. This one's a little bit. This one's going to be a little bit harder, but 2-stage or 3-stage process. What's more common for you?
3-stage.
3.
I was going to say 3, but quickly clarify.
No.
Telephone screen, first interview, second interview.
There's one thing we've got to clarify was the word quickfire.
3.
Let's then go for stability or progression.
Progression.
Okay. This one's a big one. McDonald's or Burger King?
McDonald's.
We're in line. So that brings us to the end of the episode. Thank you very, very much for your time.
Yeah, thank you very
Hopefully, obviously this is the first one we've done, so hopefully it hasn't been too bad.
Let's hope.
And
72 hours, we'll find out.
we should do. We have got other guests lined up. We've definitely got one coming up on graduate. We've got one on progression. And obviously, if anyone's got any other topics or subjects that we should approach or you want to hear about, let us know. Make sure to follow us. Coffee Club.
Share and help
Share.
spread the word.
And these episodes have been sponsored by Arrow Search, who are a staffing organisation across the UK and US.
Very good firm.
Well, I don't want to say too much, but I mean, I've got to be careful because my wife listens and she's also the co-owner. So, but we focus on anything corporate function. So if anyone needs support, both candidate, client, feel free to reach out. And
we're all accessible. So if there's any questions that you want for any of us, we can pass on.
Yeah, we can fire them across and networking's good. So thanks again and hope everyone enjoyed listening.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having us.